I like that little tidbit on humility. What Sam Spry, the life coach, was saying, that when we're humble, it opens us up to new possibilities. It makes us more accepting of others. It creates an environment in which we can learn, because if we think we've already learned everything we have to learn, then we wall people off. We close people off. And the best line for me in that whole thing was when he was quoting another person, and he said, humility is not about thinking less of yourself, but about thinking about yourself less. That's beautiful. There's something powerful about that. And humility is a huge issue, and it comes up today in the gospel lesson. Again, we've been flowing through this pattern of Jesus giving his disciples last-minute instructions as he knows the end is near, and what is the things he needs to get them to understand. And he said a couple of things about prayer. He taught them a prayer, and that the beauty of that prayer, our Father who art in heaven, is that a prayer is centered on God and not us. He also said that gratitude should be a piece that frames our life. That we need to be thankful for all the things in our life. And as we become people who are constantly thanking, it rechanges our relationships with the world around us and all the people and things in the world around us if we approach it with gratitude. And if you'll catch, the underlying part of that is that if you're not humble, you won't be grateful. But we'll get into that a little bit more too. And then he said, you need to pray constantly and be focused on justice, but not just justice, God's justice. In other words, at the heart of praying, we need to be praying for what is important to God over what's important for us. And that the focuses of our prayer should be in praying for what is important to God. And then he moves into this piece on humility. But we will get at this, because humility is a powerful thing. The problem with humility is you can't just go and be humble. Because if you're intentionally trying to go and be humble, what are you being? Prideful. And that's the catch-22. So it's one of those things where Jesus calls us to be humble, but it's not easy to do. And there are ways to do it, but there are never direct ways to do it. But humility is a powerful thing. Humility has changed the world in many ways. One of the most powerful moments in Western history came between 400 and 500 years ago, and how we were thinking in the West, and by the West I mean Europe, that whole corridor, was that we knew everything we needed to know. God gave it to us in the Bible, and anyone who tried to think about stuff outside of the Bible was wrong, a sinner, and needed to be damned to hell. And so the church, the political structure, the economic structure were all tied together into one and fed off of each other. But the assumption is that we knew everything we needed, so there was no need to learn anything more. And we had a shift start coming, and it actually came from within Christians with the belief that maybe we don't know everything, and there's a lot more to know. And what happened is, in a short period of time, some ideas came to the fore. One of those ideas was that maybe the earth is actually round, because people thought it was flat. And that if you went too far off along the ocean, you fell off the edge and died. And that the earth was flat, and there was a dome over it, and God was hiding outside of the dome. And the shift of thought came from the idea, looking at the stars, watching things around us, that maybe the earth is actually round and isn't flat. And if it's round, maybe we can actually travel all the way around it. And what that real shift was an act of humility. And what the humility is Europeans began to believe maybe we actually don't know. And through reason and science and the tools at hand, maybe we can find out. And the first thing that had a huge impact was seeing the earth as round and figuring out this imaginary line called the equator, which allowed us then, if the earth was round, to create X, Y, and Z axes to figure out how to navigate if it is round. And the idea that we don't know and maybe we can find out, coupled together, and the continent we live on was discovered. We realized that you won't fall off the edge. There was a whole another couple of continents that we didn't know about, and that the world is a much bigger place than we ever thought it would be. At the same time that was going on, humility played another role in reshaping Europe, and it came in the form of what we call the Reformation. We're a product of the Reformation, an attempt by Christians to reform the church. The struggle at the time is the way the Catholic Church was functioning was the only church in the West. Everybody was baptized once they were born, so the entire Europe was automatically baptized into the church. And the struggle that was going on is how the church was structuring itself. It was basically saying to people, you need to put forth the effort, and then God will come and meet you halfway and help you on your path to salvation. Which is actually pretty daunting, because if you're not putting forth enough effort, then God isn't going to put forth any effort, was what was being taught. And there were people who were struggling with this. One of them was Luther, one of them was Melanchthon, one of them was a guy named Zwingli. There were a whole bunch of people struggling with this. What they're struggling with is, on top of that, what the church was practicing was indulgences. You heard the term indulgences before? The simple way the indulgences work was this. You have someone that the church says that was a saintly person, means they did this much good stuff in their life, but they only needed this much to be saved by God. So God lets the church have charge of all the rest of their leftover good. Okay? And if someone wasn't a good enough person in their life when they died, they were automatically sent to purgatory, which was considered a place of extreme torture, where all the bad was tortured out of you until your soul was purified and you could go to heaven and be with God. Now, if you wanted your loved one who was in purgatory, you figured you were going to purgatory, you could go to the church, and with the right amount of money, you could buy the leftover good from saints to cover you. Okay? So what was happening was a whole bunch of wealthy people were living however they wanted, and then they would give the church a large sum of money, and the church would give them the indulgences to make it all right for them and guarantee them that they were skipping purgatory and could go straight to heaven. How this was working out for people, though, is there was a whole slew of people who were suffocating under this, because most of the people were peasants. Most of the people did not own land. Most of the people were barely making enough to make it from day to day. And we're basically being told from the church that you're probably going to be going to purgatory for a while. And that's just the reality. And some of those people struggling with that were struggling with, where is God in this? How is God in this? And is this what it should be? And so within the Catholic Church, a movement kicked off by a guy named Erasmus, who said, we need to be reading the actual Greek and Hebrew of the Bible. And we need to be actually studying the Word of God. And they started doing it. And one of the people who had an epiphany was a guy named Martin Luther. And his epiphany was, as he was reading Galatians one day, and he was reading where it says, you are saved by faith through grace, and not by works, so no one could boast. And a light went off. And a whole group of people that light went off for. And he posted a 95 thesis, struggling with what he saw. And his whole goal was, there's stuff going on in the church that we're not sure should be there. How do we help the church to look at itself, struggle through this stuff, and fix it? And he nailed the 95 thesis up because he was hoping to see positive change. He was struggling with what was going on. 50 years later, most of what he posted was actually changed within the Catholic Church. But it took about 50 years before a lot of it was actually dealt with and struggled through, but a rift had formed by then. And you had the reformers. But what was going on with Luther was he really wasn't trying to overhaul the church. What he was trying to do was to help the people in the parish he was responsible for. And he was trying to give them hope. He was trying to help them have a sense that God was with them from day to day, and that they could keep going and making it day after day, and it could make a difference in the lives of the people around them. And they were struggling of the burden of having nothing and always being behind, and he was trying to give them hope. And where he saw that hope coming from was in the realization, and in the starting point for him, for Melanchthon, for Zwingli, for all of these reformers, was they started with the cross of Christ. And they said, if the cross had to happen, then I can't save myself. It can't be me putting forth a certain effort, then God matching me once God sees the effort. I'll never put forth that effort because I'm a sinner. And they all started by getting on their knees, praying to God, saying, God, I'm a sinner. and I need your forgiveness. And letting the grace of God break in and change them. And it was humility that was at the center of what they were doing. In other words, it was them. Luther kept looking at his own life. He was a monk. He prayed the Psalms every day. He was also a professor and a pastor. And he struggled every day because every time he did something good, he saw himself selfishly somehow being every act of good he did. And his struggle was, how do I not sin? And he never felt he could not sin. And the epiphany he had was the realization that if he's saved by grace, then God is the one that sets things right. And that gave him new hope. And for him and his fellow colleagues, their starting point every morning was to get down on their knees before God and say to God, I am a sinner. I need your grace to forgive me. And then figuring out how to live their life out of that. That framework changed the world. The whole Protestant church exists because of that. It wasn't that they wanted to wreck the Catholic Church. It wasn't that they were trying to abolish the Catholic Church. It wasn't that they wanted to start a church of any kind. It's that they somehow felt that there were things going on that didn't fit what they thought God was about. And what they were trying to do was give hope to the people they were serving every day in their parish. And weren't sure how to do it. And we're trying to give them hope to keep going and face a new day and find God present in that day and ways to love in that day. Jesus is trying to push his disciples because they're dealing with their own sets of issues with the Roman Empire. They're trying to deal with their own struggle with who is this Jesus in light of the Roman Empire that is ruling over us. And he's trying to get them to understand who he is, what he's about, and how they can live faithfully to God in light of who he is. If you think about the whole beginning of the gospel story with Jesus, it's a story of humility. Paul in Philippians calls it, Jesus did not consider equality with God to be something to lift up or lord over, and emptied himself to become human, to live among us, to minister with us, and to die at our hands. That's a powerful image of humility. Jesus is now talking with these disciples. He's trying to help them understand, how do we connect with God? How do we pray? Where does this all come from? And he suddenly tells this story. He doesn't just tell the story to anyone. He tells it in response to people who thought they were good people. In other words, he told it in response to people, and as Luke says, who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. In other words, people who said, I'm a good Christian. I pray every day. I go to church each week. I tithe. I give my 10% to God through the church each week. I don't do this. I don't do that. I don't get drunk. I don't smoke. I don't... Whole list of how I'm good and how I'm not bad. And we're believing in their own righteousness. And we're having contempt toward others. And the contempt wasn't, oh, that's a scummy person. But oftentimes the contempt that they were having was subtle. Like, if they just chose differently, they wouldn't be poor. And if instead of having a cell phone, they just had a landline, and instead of having cable, they just had an antenna, and instead of having a big TV, they had a little one, and they could save a couple $100 a month right there, and with the right choices, then they could pay down their debt and get out of their poverty. They were judging, but indirectly, subtly, simply, under the radar, where they weren't thinking to themselves that that's what they're doing. And Jesus comes and he tells this disturbing story. He says there was a Pharisee and a tax collector who go to the temple to pray, and the Pharisee, religious leader, someone who is about making sure people follow God's law correctly and are living according to God's way of life correctly, stands there and he prays to God, I am so thankful, Lord. Whether or not it's real gratitude is a whole other question. I am so thankful, Lord, that I am not like those other people who aren't making the right choices, who aren't living their life correctly, who don't have it all together, who have a whole bunch of debt, who are struggling with credit cards, who are I am so glad I'm not like that. And then the tax collector, who won't even go to the place of praying, stands off to a distance, won't even look up to heaven where God believed God to be. And he's beating his chest, a sign of grief, a sign of struggle, a sign of yearning, beating his chest. And he prays, God, have mercy on me. I'm a sinner. And Jesus says, he's going home justified. Wow. That's uncomfortable. Jesus is calling us to be the tax collector, but if I'm honest, I probably feel more like the Pharisee. And I'd like to think I'm the tax collector, but the odds are I'm probably more often the Pharisee. And that's hard. But again, what Jesus is getting at is humility. And the humility doesn't come from me trying to be humble. It comes from me being honest. Humility comes when I'm honest and I can say before God and others, I'm a sinner. And when I can see it, I can face it, and I can name it. You know, Luther, every morning, got down on his knees and he prayed to God, Lord, I'm a sinner. And if it weren't for your grace, I would do no good. Please grant me your grace so that I can at least, some good can come to what I try and do. And that was his whole struggle. I'm a sinner. And his starting point was that. Humility doesn't come from us trying to be humble. Humility comes from when we realize I need God's grace. I need God's love. Gratitude doesn't come from pride. When I think I have it together, and we can have pride for good and bad. I can have pride in the positive things, but I can also take pride in the negative things. I can think I'm not worthy and have as much pride in acting hidden behind that keeps me from doing because I'm not worthy, have nothing to offer. That's actually pride, negative pride. Or that I am good and I am special, positive pride. They get in the way of things like gratitude. They get in the way of me letting go of myself and focusing on others. Humility that Jesus is talking about comes from us recognizing we're the tax collector and falling on our knees before God saying, I'm a sinner. Forgive me. Give me the grace to get up and try again today. And to try and live on my faith today. And to try and love who you bring into my life today. Gratitude comes from that too. I can be thankful that God has given me a day and a chance to try and live out my faith again and love the people I encounter. Now, our sin is we get obsessed with focusing on ourselves and we miss God and others. Our faith is when we let go of ourselves and we start thinking about others more. Or about ourselves a lot. And what Jesus has been trying to do and trying to help his disciples understand how to pray, understand how to orient their lives, understand how to think as God thinks. I think he's trying to push them to get that need to be able to get on our knees and say before God, I am a sinner, I need your grace. Please forgive me. I need your mercy. Please forgive me. And empower me to try again today to love the people you bring to me. And to let them love me as well. And our challenge this week is how are we going to open ourselves up to all the new possibilities that come with humility? How are we going to come before God in such a way that we can see the people around us differently, see the possibilities around us differently, allow the grace of God to break into our lives, and to trust the power of God's Spirit to help us love anew each day this week and love afresh the people God brings us each day this coming week. Let that be our challenge. Let us pray.